Okay. Do we have any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Do we have any changes or questions about the minutes from the previous meeting? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. We're on to item 3, which is public comment, and we have been asked by Jeff Pierce to give a comment here. So, Jeff, you want to go up to the public mic?
Good morning, Chairman Clark, distinguished members of the Shad and River Heron Board. My name is Jeff Pierce. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alewife Harvesters of Maine. My comments today are just a few for consideration for both this board and the technical committee. Maine, over the last decade, has opened up thousands of acres of rivers and stream habitat through the removal of several large dams. There are many river restoration projects going on in different communities to restore fish passage. Citizen scientists, conservation committees, local select boards and universities are working with lake associations, Maine's Department of Marine Resources, and other stakeholders to get many alewife and blueback heron, collectively known as river heron, back into their native spawning ground. Maine Department of Transportation has also been working diligently on stream passage with a culvert replacement program, which recently gained approval for additional funding from the Maine State Legislature. These are just a few examples of the positive conservation and restoration efforts going on in Maine, Massachusetts. There are similar restoration efforts going on with citizen scientists and the other local community efforts. Many of us hope that the technical committee will take into consideration the social and economic effects of the community effort on river heron restoration when they bring proposals to harvest river heron and consider all the benefits and aspects of this culturally important fishery, including basing their decisions on hard scientific data. Allowing small-scale commercial and educational harvest builds goodwill when it comes time for municipal leaders to allocate funding for critical restoration work in their communities. Thank you for this opportunity to make public comment, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm sure commissioners can talk to you after the meeting here and get up with you on that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 4, which is to review the river herring stock assessment update, and for that I'll turn it over to Technical Committee Chair Brad Chase.
Thank you, John. Good morning. I'm going to run through the river herring stock assessment update. I'd like to start by thanking the stock assessment subcommittee for all their good work to put this together. It was really a challenging endeavor, given all the different data sources they had to look at, and also a difficult time of the year. I want to thank the staffers as well for helping out, Jeff Kipp, Kirby, and Ashton Hart, for all the work they did to shepherd this through the SAS as well as the TC review. So I'll go through the background and present some of the data results, focusing on the abundance data, the biological metrics, and total mortality estimates, and then finish up with a conclusion. The SAS had recommended that trend analysis were updated after 5 years beyond the stock assessment in 2012, and that a new benchmark assessment would be conducted in 10 years from now in 2022. The feeling was that a full assessment really wasn't warranted at this point in time because of the variability in the indices from the previous assessment, and also there's been a number of changes that have occurred. A number of states have put in harvest bans. There's been a fair amount of restoration activity to restore access to historic spawning grounds, and we've had a number of sustainable fishery management plans that have been enacted. So it was felt that it would be too soon to conduct the assessment after just 5 years with all this activity and given the life history of river herring. So river herring management should really ideally be conducted on a river-specific basis. And this is difficult because there are so many individual systems, and also these stocks do mix in the marine environment. So you have a diatomous life history, which is complicated to produce a coast-wide stock assessment. You also have challenges in that you have different data quality among the river systems, and some systems have no data at all. And then again, you have limited information coming from the mixed stock ocean bycatch, where it's difficult to relate what happens at sea back to the river-specific stocks. So instead of a coast-wide model approach, it's more of a trend analysis. And the most common trend analysis used was Mann-Kendall. The benchmark also produced reference points of total mortality, and this was repeated. There were several catch-at-age population models conducted, one for Monument River, Massachusetts, and the Chohan River in North Carolina, and these were updated, but they did not factor heavily into the update. They will be continued, and there was also a depletion-based stock reduction analysis that was conducted for the benchmark, but this was not endorsed by the peer review panel, so it was not updated. So 57 river systems were evaluated on the East Coast. Of these, 26% had complete or usable data. The SAS looked at 9 categories of fishery-independent and fishery-dependent data by species, both blueback and alewife, harvest data, age, length, weight, repeat spawner ratio, and then adult, juvenile, and catch per unit effort, fishery-independent and dependent indices. And a large majority of these did occur in New England states. So I'll run through, well, I guess the next slide, sorry about that. The benchmark was updated through 2015, so the update period was 2011 to 2015. And data sets that were reviewed for the benchmark that were found to be too brief but had reached 10 years by 2015 were included this time around, but in effect that was just the addition of 1 data series. So overall, the update lost data series as several data sets were discontinued due to management actions, unreliability in the data sources, or lack of returning fish. To briefly mention commercial landings, coastwide landings have been stable since the benchmark. The upper graph shows historical landings going back to about 1880, and I think we're all familiar with that large peak that occurred in the 50s, 60s, and 70s as domestic fleets went offshore fishing for sea herring and mackerel and caught river herring as bycatch, and also foreign fleets came in as well and led to really high landings in that period. Those landings declined sharply in the 1980s, and you can see that red circle on the far right. That's where we are today. Fairly stable landings since 2006 at about 1.4 million pounds, and the SAS felt that this information might have reduced utility because we've had a number of harvest moratoria in place since then. Either way, it does show stability in the benchmark period. Most of those commercial landings are occurring in main spawning run fisheries or at bycatch in offshore fisheries. The incidental ocean bycatch has been stable. Well, I wouldn't say stable, but has been reduced since the benchmark. For the most recent period, it's been 227 metric tons has been the average, which is about half of what it was in 2005 to 2010, where it was near 500 metric tons. And again, the impact of this catch upon stock status is largely unknown because we can't relate the mixing at sea very well back to river-specific stocks. I think it is good news to see that graph declining. A lot of folks have worked hard to try to gain more information on ocean bycatch, and we are seeing that reduction in recent years. So following a framework that was established during the benchmark, which was a consensus-based expert opinion framework to evaluate trends, trends were updated for abundance and total mortality. And the terminal 5-year trends were determined during the benchmark were updated and evaluated for the final 10 years of the data series, which is 2006 to 2015. And so we'll go through those trends now. These trends are also summarized in Table 1 of the Assessment Update Report. So I'll start with commercial catch per unit effort data, and this shows the series that are presently active in dark lettering. The ones that have been discontinued are crossed out in red. And for commercial CPUE, there are just 3 series that are present. There were 10 series before, and these have been discontinued for various reasons. And so what I'll do is show the trends, and you can see the arrow here. The SAS assigned trends of increasing, decreasing, stable, no trend due to high variability, or unknown. And the symbols next to the trend symbol, RH means both alewife and blueback combined, A for alewife, B for blueback. And so these are 3 commercial series, and you can see the Hudson River is increasing and the other 2 are stable. For run size data, quite a few states have counts on spawning run counts, and you can see that 4 series have been discontinued since the benchmark. And you can also see there's very few south of New England. And here are the trends. It's a fairly mixed bag, but what you can see is there are none of these that are declining in this period of 2006 to 2015. For blueback, 1 is increasing, 4 have no trends. For alewife, 6 are increasing, 8 have no trends. And then combined series, 4 are increasing, 2 are stable. So for this 10-year period, we have a general increasing trend with spawning run counts. Young-of-the-year fishery independent survey data. 9 states have these data surveys. And here are the trends. Again, it's mixed. For blueback, 2 are increasing, 6 have no trend. For alewife, 1 is decreasing, and 6 have no trend. And for combined species, there's 1 with no trend. Fishery independent trawl survey data. There are 5 states that have these trawl surveys. Then you have the New England Fisheries Science Center bottom trawl survey that covers the large area in blue. And these are showing a fairly stable picture. A few of these are increasing. 3 alewife are increasing, 3 with no trend for alewife. Blueback has 1 decreasing, 1 increasing, and 4 with no trend. Fishery independent and fishery dependent length data. So we have quite a few series here. And in this case, mean length has either declined or is showing no significant trends for all rivers examined. So none of these mean length series are increasing. You have significant declines for alewife bisex in 4 of the 9 river systems in the trawl survey, and significant declines for blueback bisex in 6 of the 9 systems examined. And these results are fairly consistent with the benchmark period and somewhat lower in some cases than historic data. And a similar pattern is seen for max length data as well. For fishery independent and fishery dependent age data, we have fewer data series. There are 6 states that have this information, with 1 series dropping out since the benchmark. And so if you combine these data, there's 112 river-specific age and species combinations, and 26 of these have reversed their significance from the benchmark analysis. But the pattern is similar to mean length. In most cases, mean length at age is declining, and each river has at least 1 age where there is a decline in a mean length at age. Although there is this modest declining pattern, the coastwide pattern shows little change since the benchmark. Fishery independent and fishery dependent repeat spawner data. 6 states have these. 2 of these have dropped out since the benchmark. And repeat spawner data is very similar to mean length. These have all declined or showed no significant trend in all rivers examined. Significant declines have occurred for alewives bisex in 4 of the 10 rivers examined. For blueback, it's significant declines in 2 of the 5 rivers. And again, the results are similar to the benchmark, and it's a declining trend relative to historic data in some of these systems. So these biological indicators that reflect on total mortality are showing a general decline, whereas the empirical estimates for total mortality have a little different story. These states either age otolith the scales for river herring. 1 of these series has dropped out since the benchmark. And so here we have a fairly stable picture with 3 of these series declining in this period. Blueback 3 have no trend, Alewife have 3 decreasing, and 7 have no trend. So again, a slight decline in some of the series for the empirical total mortality estimates, whereas it's the opposite view for some of the biological indicators for total mortality. The SAS also produced Z benchmarks, and they used the spawning potential ratio, which looks at the total mortality rate that would reduce the spawning stock biomass to a specified percent of a virgin or unfished spawning stock biomass. And the SAS for the benchmark assessment picked a Z of 20% SPR and a Z of 40% SPR to develop these reference points. And the peer review looked at this, and they recommended using natural mortality rates, a rate of 0.7, and they preferred the Z at SPR of 40%. And so this was repeated for the update. So for the update, Z continued to be high for most of the stocks. They looked at the 3-year terminal average for observed Z values, and they looked at the 40% SPR value. And so for 12 of the 14 stocks that had available data, they were above that benchmark. During the benchmark assessment, with a 3-year average, there were 18 stocks that had available data, and all these were above the Z at 40% benchmark. And so recent Z values are not available for 3 stocks due to lack of returning fish or aging errors. So there's fewer series to look at. The picture improved slightly, but overall, the mortality estimates were well above the reference point in most cases. So to conclude, most data evaluated reflected conditions that were similar to the benchmark stock assessment. Most of the fishery-independent indices indicate interannual variation in stock size at low stock size, and that more time is needed to reflect large-scale changes in abundance. There were some positive trends, particularly in the spawning run counts and trends of abundance, particularly in the Northeast. And it's also interesting to point that trends in total mortality estimates and biological indicators of mortality were often in conflict. So given the conflicting results for mortality estimates, conclusions about mortality remain uncertain. However, in comparison to reference points, some rivers have total mortality in recent years that may be unsustainable. So overall, there were 16 of the 54 stocks that were reviewed for 2006 to 2015 that had increasing abundance trends. 2 were decreasing, 8 were stable, 10 experienced no discernible trend due to high variability, and 18 did not have enough data to assess recent trends. And the coastwide status was determined to be depleted. There were positive signs that were apparent, but the information indicates the status of the river herring meta population being depleted to near historic low remains unchanged since the benchmark stock assessment. And so the depleted status indicates that there was evidence for declines in abundance due to numbers of factors such as predation, river mortality, fishing, but the relative importance of these factors in reducing river herring stocks could not be determined. I just wanted to mention that we have now in the river herring management, there are 5 states that have approved sustainable fishery management plans. Maine has the largest number at 20. New Hampshire has several rivers in Great Bay. Massachusetts and New York have 1 each, and South Carolina has 2, which we'll review shortly today. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Brad. Do we have any questions for Brad about this presentation? First up, Emerson, and then Jim. Anybody else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Brad, for your presentation. I have 2 questions, Mr. Chairman. Can I ask them both? I have 2 questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. One is, and you went by it pretty quickly, it was toward the end of your presentation. Did you say that some rivers have total mortality? Did you say that some river systems have total mortality?
Well, yeah, several. If you want to go back to that slide, there's several rivers that have estimates of total mortality.
So does that mean, well, there's got to be some fish that return, though, right?
No, the total mortality estimate's based on age structure of scales or otoliths that produce an estimate of the total mortality for that population, for that river-specific population. So it's an estimate of the percent that would survive or die for that population.
Yeah, that's interesting. And my other question is, I noticed in the trawl surveys, you didn't mention the NEMAP survey. Do they not encounter any river herring?
I can't speak for if they do or they don't, but all data series that were available for the East Coast were evaluated by the SAS, and they selected ones that were suitable for the update. So I can't comment on that particular survey.
Okay, next up, Jim.
Thanks, Chairman. And Brad, that was a great presentation. I really, what happened in the Mid-Atlantic where we lost all those surveys is kind of interesting. But I'm just wondering if there's other surveys, particularly like in New York, we have, I know at least 3 other surveys that are going on Long Island. The Peconics, we've gotten after Hurricane Sandy, there was a breach, and now the Carmen's River is being monitored. And there's been fish ladders put in all that place, so there's like a whole new set of data, and I would be assuming up and down the coast. So it doesn't look like that got incorporated, but is there maybe a plan to get that in the future? Because that seems to be, a broader data set that maybe we're not tapping at this point.
Yeah, I think that's the intention of the SAS. That there are many rivers on the East Coast that are monitored presently, and the SAS looked at all the data available, and the rule of thumb they're using is they want to see 10 years of data, and so when a data series reaches that point, it'll be considered. So I think that as these data collection efforts mature, we'll see a number of series come to use, which will benefit the assessment.
Thanks. Next question is Roy Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brad, you stated that the estimates of Z, total mortality, exceeded the benchmark in a number of cases. Do you have any feeling for how much of that Z is caused by offshore fisheries as opposed to inshore environmental factors and/or inshore harvest?
It's an excellent question, and it is a source of a lot of uncertainty with the assessment. You really can't separate those sources of mortality from those estimates. We just don't have that information. So I think it's a good reference point to look at and to monitor going forward, and I think there are studies that are underway to try to get at that question of how to separate mortality sources, but presently that's not possible.
Do we have any further questions for Brad? Seeing none, thank you very much for the excellent presentation, Brad. Our next agenda item is the timeline for the Shad stock assessment update, which will be given by Jeff Kipp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just have a brief update on the next assessment for American Shad, which was determined to be an update for 2018. So the TC met and they initially recommended an update of the most recent benchmark stock assessment, which was conducted in 2007. The reasons cited for remaining with an update versus a benchmark stock assessment, the primary reasons were the short time series of new monitoring efforts that have come in line since Amendment 3 was implemented are probably still too short to be used in a benchmark similar to what we just discussed for river herring at this time. And also another primary reason was the need to develop robust stock-specific ocean bycatch estimates of these mixed stocks out in the ocean interacting with other fisheries. The proposed timeline is the completion of the assessment for the 2018 August meeting. But we just wanted to communicate some challenges experienced while going through the river herring assessment update. There was some committee turnover on the river herring stock assessment subcommittee, and we expect much more significant committee turnover, pretty much complete turnover, since the Shad benchmark assessment. And so there is some institutional knowledge lost in that during that benchmark assessment process. And this type of assessment was a lot of consensus building, a lot of expert opinion, and so some of that information is lost, and that's what we're trying to update for 2018. Also, there is some changing recommendations on the data sets to be used based on the change in committee membership, and that's another thing that we experienced during the river herring assessment update. As we went over for river herring, there were several data sets that have been discontinued due to various reasons, and we expect to experience that same thing with American shad. And another challenge that we anticipate that's unique to American shad there are several publications that have come out since the benchmark stock assessment that have questioned the reliability of aging techniques that are used and have been used historically to age shad with scales. So the next steps are that we would like to, now that we've experienced these issues going through the river herring assessment update and have discussed more internally these issues that we expect to come up with American shad being aging, we feel the need to go back to the technical committee and stock assessment subcommittee and discuss these challenges and identify how we anticipate to approach this benchmark or this assessment update. And so if there are any recommendations for a change to this assessment process or suggestions of what this assessment update will look like, we plan to bring those forward at the annual meeting and update this board on those recommendations. So that's all I have. Are there any questions on that?
Thanks, Jeff. Do we have any questions for Jeff on the shad stock? Oh, we have one over there. Rob O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Jeff. So I've got two questions. The first is the initial slide. You showed the ocean bycatch, so I'm wondering what that's all about. And the second question has to do with the peer review of the previous benchmark, and I don't recall how either glowing or what that review was, but I'm wondering about an update if there were any problems with the peer review from the last benchmark.
Yeah, so the ocean bycatch, it's similar to the issue with river herring, is there is ocean bycatch of shad and river herring, and those are mixed stocks, these river-specific stocks that go out and mix and are captured by these fisheries. So I think we're getting better information on the magnitude of what that ocean bycatch is in more recent years, but there is also the need to partition that bycatch amongst the river-specific stocks. And there is recent information and work on doing that for river herring and partitioning that out by the genetic analyses. But that is a major hurdle to moving to more complex techniques for assessing both shad and river herring. So that's a major hurdle to moving on to a benchmark of American shad. And one of the reasons we decided to stick with an update of the previous assessment. In the previous assessment, was approved by peer review and subsequently by this board. There were probably some recommendations coming out of that by the peer review, but given that this would be an update assessment, the stock assessment subcommittee would pretty much follow the techniques and use the data sets that were used during that benchmark assessment process, given the process of an assessment update. And so the opportunity to improve on some of those recommendations from the peer review of the 2007 assessment would likely be implemented in a future benchmark assessment.
Yeah, Rob.
So just to follow up on the intercept fishery, do the previous studies assist at all with this delineation of river-specific stocks? So I realized the study by Bonnie Brown back maybe around 1990 was a mitochondrial DNA study, And then there was also a tagging study by Jessian from Maryland and several others back around 91, 92. Do you also, is that too far back, or is that any use at all, given that most of the genetic work is now just not mitochondrial DNA alone, but is supplemented by nuclear DNA? How does that all work?
I'm not as familiar with those studies, so I would just speak to the primary issue being we do have some snapshot information on what that ocean bycatch looks like. I think the challenge is developing a time series of that ocean bycatch partition out amongst the stocks and how that changes by year. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges for using that information in a more standard or traditional stock assessment model.
Thanks. Are there any other questions for Jeff? Lauren?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, sir. Thank you for your report. My question relates to the hickory shad that runs up the rivers just before the American shad. I have personal experience at the Conowingo Dam at the mouth of the Susquehanna River, and it seems to me their run is at a peak around April 20th, the white shad or American shad around April 30th. My question is, can we extrapolate any trends for the hickory shad based upon the American shad numbers? Thank you.
I don't believe that's something the SAS looked at in depth during the benchmark assessment back in 2007. And so that would be kind of a new endeavor. And I just don't know at this point whether that is something that could be considered to provide information on the American shad trends.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jeff, and we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is consider approval of shad and river herring sustainable fishery management plans. This is a final action, and we'll start with Brad Chase reviewing the SFMPs and technical committee memo for the South Carolina and the Florida plans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll start with the Blueback Herring Sustainable Fishery Plan update for South Carolina, prepared by Bill Host and Chad Holbrook, and reviewed by the TC in March. So this plan was first approved in 2011, and it really focused on the commercial fishery in the Santee Cooper River complex, as well as small commercial fishery in the PD River. The plan in 2011 also closed all of the fisheries, and it developed sustainability targets for those two fisheries to remain open, and this was implemented in the 2012 season. So it's basically a 5-year update, and here's a view of the rediversion canal in the Santee Cooper complex, where most of the fishing occurs with cast nets. There's a 10-bushel daily limit per boat. It occurs in March and April. So it's a fairly focused traditional fishery that's been going on here for a long time. Here are graphs that show the catch per unit effort, and the low graph shows the man days as well as the landings over time. And you can see there's been a few peaks, but a fair amount of fluctuation in recent years. And so the sustainability benchmarks are really focused on an exploitation rate that was developed between 1986 and 1990 during a mark and recapture study that looked at total harvest and the mark and recapture estimates for the total numbers of fish in the river. And so they applied a scaled exploitation rate of 0.05 to present management. And so they're proposing to do the same for this update, use that exploitation rate of 0.05, and it's a 3-year running average. The graph shows the relative exploitation rate over time, and you can see the metric, and all these years they have been below that. So they are proposing to have no change to this benchmark. For the PD River, it's a small commercial fishery with gill nets. It's executed by a small number of permit holders. They have catch limits of 500 kilograms, and they also have a benchmark with a 3-year running average, and they're proposing no change to their metrics for this plan update. I should say in recent years, landings have not exceeded 1,000 kilograms, so a very small fishery. And so here is the PD River harvest in the 3-year running average. And you can see there's been a couple of years they have exceeded that, again by a small margin, with slightly increasing landings in recent years. So they are collecting fishery-dependent biological data as well, and they have fork length as well as repeat spawning marks from 2011 to the present. So the plans, there's very little change. The catch limits are remaining the same. They're both using the 3-year running average as their metrics, and they're requesting to have this approved with the same plan as before. The TC reviewed this, and they had a couple comments that I'll share with you. Again, the relative exploitation rate of 0.052 was derived from this 1986 to 1990 market recapture estimate, and they picked 4 years and used the lower confidence interval estimates for the total population estimate, and divided that by the harvest, and that produced the relative exploitation rate. The TC had questions about the data quality, using the older data to apply to the present day, and asked if there were conditions that might have changed the applicability of this scalar metric to the present day. The response was that it was really the best available proxy for exploitation rates, and that it was selected to be the lower confidence interval, so therefore it was quite low and conservative. And secondly, the TC expressed concerns over the absence of biological metrics, as well as the absence of a secondary sustainability benchmark, and they asked for more detail on management responses if they did in fact exceed one of the benchmarks. This was discussed, and the recommendation was that these things would be developed and included in the next update. So the TC did approve this plan to move on to the board's consideration and approval, with the inclusions of the recommendations number 2.
Thanks, Brad. Maybe it would be better to take questions after each review of these plans. Are there any questions about the South Carolina SFMP? Mike Armstrong?
I guess my only question is, based on the TC recommendation, how do we physically approve it and include a mandated recommendation? I don't know how that's done, or if we can.
Well, in discussion with South Carolina, they were willing to explore adding those features, and it really is a question of just having the data developed. I think they have all they need to develop biological metrics, and so I think this can be done. One of the themes that the TC discussed was some of these plans that were approved in that first round, 2010, 2011, was they had management responses listed if a benchmark was exceeded, but they didn't have very much detail to what that response was. And so that was something the TC was interested in seeing a little more detail in that, maybe some standardization to how these actions occur, instead of just stating there will be a management response, explicitly outlining what that would be.
So we have another question. Andy Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it was the first graphic. It showed the catch period effort was stable, but landings were increasing. Is that because there are more people entered the fishery?
That is a good question. I'd have to defer from somebody from South Carolina who might have that information. I don't know the answer to that.
Ross, do you have that information?
Well, could you repeat the question?
Sure. I think it was the very first graphic. It showed that catch period effort was stable, but then landings were increasing. I was just wondering why.
You know, that's a good question. You know, we've seen some response to, you know, environmental conditions. We went through a period of drought. These recent years, our runs have increased. So I guess we feel like there may be more fish available to that same amount of effort that's being exploited, that's being applied.
Any further questions? Okay. Dr. Rhodes?
Yeah, I can just speak anecdotally. When we've had meetings with, you know, the Shad River herring fishermen in the area, and they'll be the first to admit when we've had these areas or times of drought, there's been very low fish recruitment. And then when we've had years of good river flow, and, you know, this is going, again, anecdotally from the fishermen, but they will talk for, you know, these 20, 30 years. Most of these are elderly fishermen, and they say when the flow's up, the fish are in. So I think that's where we're getting some of this variation, and it, you know, I bet it correlates very closely, as Ross said, you know, with the river flow conditions in times of drought or high water.
Our folks back home are monitoring our discussion.
Good.
And they agreed with what I said, by the way, that you know, with increased flows, we are seeing more fish in the rivers, which is providing more opportunity for that same number of anglers to harvest more fish.
Thanks. Given some of the comments we've heard, would the board prefer to hear both plans and then take motions on approval, or do each of these separately? It sounded like there might be some interest in putting some conditions in the motion. Oh. Okay, doesn't look like anybody's got a strong opinion on this, so why don't we do the Florida, get the update on the Florida SFMP, and then we'll take motions on both. Thanks.
And I did just read up on the notes from the last TC meeting that reviewed this, and there was discussion on how flow diversions in that canal can affect catchability. So it does seem to be a factor. So let me run through the American Shad Sustainable Fishery Plan with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission for the St. John River. This plan was also first approved by the board in 2011, and so this is the 5-year update. And this is strictly for recreational fishing in the St. John River. The 2011 plan used both recreational angler catch per unit effort information from 1993 to 2005. It also had a spawning stock biomass abundance estimate they used. And thirdly, they had a juvenile abundance index that was used in that fishery management plan. So they're proposing the update to include those data series with few changes. So the present fishery has no commercial harvest, strictly recreational. Pound nets and haul seines were prohibited in the St. John River, and gill nets were prohibited in all state waters in 1995. It is a hook and line recreational fishery only. Anglers must possess a saltwater fishing license. There's a bag limit of 10 Alosa species per person per day. And voluntary catch and release really is the common activity in this fishery. For stock monitoring, they have the Juvenile Abundance Index. It's a bow-mounted push net. It's been conducted since 2007. They sample biweekly, April through July, between river kilometer 210 and 250, and in tidal and freshwater stretches between river kilometer 125 and 165. So there's two separate sections that they sample for juveniles. And then secondly, they have a spawning stock relative index of abundance. It's an electrofishing survey. It's been conducted since 2003, and it provides a catch per unit effort index as well as biological samples of length, sex ratio, and age. So here is the St. John River complex. You can see there's two highlighted sections in dark blue above and below this large lake where the sampling occurs for juveniles. And here's where the electrofishing occurs in 3 river stretches, and these are highlighted in blue, and they are separated by quite a large distance. So the creel survey was conducted from 1993 to 2005. It was a roving creel survey in a specific stretch from river kilometer 285 to 298. It was redone in 2011, and I do not believe it's ongoing presently. So the 2 benchmarks are based on the juvenile index as well as the adult index, and what they have is a benchmark value. It's based on the 25th percentile, and the management triggers if there's 3 consecutive years below this benchmark, there will be a management response. Here's a graph showing the juvenile abundance index with that benchmark as the hash line moving across, and you can see most of these data points are above that. In recent years, several data points are well above that mark, and this is an ongoing series that it will be one of the 2 benchmarks in the present update. The spawning stock CPUE benchmark, here's a graph depicting the same concept. The benchmark is shown running across the graph. The data points, for the most part, are above that. There was discussion on high water impacts of this data series changing catchability, and there was discussion at the TC level of having Florida use a GLM to try to tease out some of these influences of flow, as well as catchability changes among the different locations where they're sampling. And these photos portray what they can find in the St. John River. They have years of extremely low water where sampling is confined to a very relatively narrow river channel, and then other years of very high water they can have a very wide channel at which they could sample, and it certainly can affect catchability in these surveys. So the recreational fishery, here's the creel survey results. And I think I was mistaken. You can see that it does continue after 2011, so there was a gap after 2005 to 2010, and then it has been resumed. And Florida does seem to want to commit to keeping this series going. So this was reviewed also in March, and the TC again discussed the possibility of looking at using a GLM to try to gain more information, to standardize the data, and to see if we can get at some of these questions on flow influences on catchability in the data series. And Florida was interested in exploring that for the next update. The similar theme came up about having benchmark responses, but without detail as to what those management responses would be. And so the TC was interested in seeing greater detail and specificity to what would happen if the benchmarks were exceeded. And the TC went on to recommend that the board approve the Sustainable Fishery Management Plan with consideration for the improvements discussed in items 1 and 2 on this slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Any questions about the Florida SFMP? And seeing none. Oh, I'm sorry. Rob O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I was just curious about the push net sampling because that occurred in some Virginia rivers. Is that a nighttime sampling?
It typically is. In this case, I don't think I have that information if it is or not, so I'd have to ask Florida if it is in fact nighttime sampling.
Jim, you want to answer that?
Yes, it typically is.
Any further questions? Seeing none, would somebody like to put forth a motion to approve these plans? Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve South Carolina Sustainable Fishery Management Plan for river herring and the Florida Sustainable Fishery Management Plan for shad, inclusive of TC recommendations.
We have a second by Dr. Rhodes. Let's wait till we have the modified motion up there. Okay, so the motion is the move to approve the South Carolina Sustainable Fishery Management Plan for river herring and the Florida Sustainable Fishery Management Plan for shad, inclusive of the technical committee recommendations. Do we have any discussion on this motion? Rob O'Reilly.
So given Mike Armstrong's comments earlier, can we see what the second item was for South Carolina that was coming from the technical committee and make sure it's a recommendation?
We'll get that back. Can we get that back up? Do you want to amend the motion, Rob?
No, that's fine. I just needed to see that again. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any further discussion of the motion? Seeing none, are there any objections to the motion? Seeing none, the motion is approved by unanimous consent. And that concludes item number 6, and we move on to item 7. And Kirby will be giving us a review of the FMP review and state compliance reports for 2017. This is also an action item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm subbing back in on shad and river herring and trying to get up to speed as much as possible, so please bear with me as I go through the fishery management plan review. So next slide. We have landings information here. As you all are aware, there's been a steady increase in landings over time, in part due to the moratoria implemented through Amendments 2 and 3. States with shad commercial landings are New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And states with river herring commercial landings are Maine, New Hampshire, New York, Maryland, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And in 2015, a total of 478,688 pounds of American shad were landed, which was about a 38% decrease from 2014 levels. In 2015, about 2 million pounds of river herring were landed, which is a 9% increase from 2014 levels. And 153,000 pounds of hickory shad were landed, which is an approximate 29% increase from 2014 levels. In the states with the largest shares of shad landing are North Carolina and South Carolina, and the state with the largest share of river herring landings is Maine. So moving on to river herring passage counts, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and South Carolina all have projects in place. Coastwide, 3.82 million river herring passed through and were counted this year. Coastwide, a total of 611,000 American shad were counted as having passed through. In terms of how these fare relative to 2014 numbers, it's about a 26% increase for river herring, and it's about a 43% increase for shad. There are also coastwide stocking projects occurring in Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, Maryland, the District of Columbia, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And in total, 21 million hatchery alosines were reintroduced in 2015. And river herring is stocked in lakes and river basins in Maine, but they are wild caught, so they're not hatchery raised, and that's why we don't have any specific information included in the FMP review on that. Brad went through earlier the sustainable fishery management plans that this board has reviewed at the beginning of the year, and I wanted to give you all just a kind of an outline of what to expect for the annual meeting. So today, this board approved the South Carolina river herring and the Florida shad SFMPs. There will be a number of SFMPs that the technical committee is going to need to review over the next month or so. So I know that Ashton had sent out before a request for states to submit that information by August 30th, and I would request that you try to do that sooner if possible, because as you can see, we have 5 that the TC is going to need to review and provide recommendations to the board on at the ASMFC annual meeting. Another component of the FMP review is reporting out sturgeon interactions. In 2015, 196 interactions were reported. 176 of those were Atlantic sturgeon and 20 were short-nosed sturgeon. These took place in Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. All were released alive with the exception of 15 fatalities that took place in North Carolina. And last, there were de minimis requests from the states of Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida for American shad, and for New Hampshire and Florida regarding river herring, and all these states meet the requirements for de minimis. So with that, I will take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirby. Do we have any questions for Kirby? Lynn Fegley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple things for the record. I just wanted to correct that the state of Maryland is closed for the commercial harvest of river herring. I think that might have been PRFC. And also, I do not believe that we're doing run counts in the state of Maryland. So just for the record.
Thanks, Lynn. Also, Delaware does have a shad stocking program. Any other questions or comments on the FMP review? Seeing none, do we have a motion to, or do we need a motion for this? Okay, we have a motion. Mike Armstrong.
Move to approve the 2016 FMP review of the 2015 fishing year and approve de minimis requests for Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida for shad, and de minimis requests for New Hampshire and Florida for river herring.
Do we have a second? Sheree Patterson. Okay, do we have any discussion of this motion? Seeing none, do we have any objection to the motion? Seeing none, let me read it into the record. It is moved to approve the 2016 FMP review of the 2015 fishing year and approve de minimis requests for Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Florida for shad, and de minimis requests for New Hampshire and Florida for river herring. Motion by Mr. Armstrong, second by Ms. Patterson. And seeing no objections, the motion is passed by unanimous consent. Okay, that brings us up to item number 8, other business. Is there any other business to come before this board? Seeing none, we are adjourned, and we finished an hour early, so eel will be starting before 10 o'clock, so don't go too far. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, since you're chairing both boards, are you okay with starting eel in about 15 minutes?
Oh, I'm fine with that. That'll be great. 15 minutes, everybody.